They rolled up that Wednesday, looking like they'd just stepped out of a country club catalog. The kind of folks who have opinions about everything except how much they bother you. I was sitting on the porch, boots propped, thinking about nothing at all, when those smiles turned sharp and they handed me a letter real polite, like it was an invitation to Sunday supper. Except what it actually said was I owed them. For living on land my grandfather near about willed to me with his dying breath. That's the moment the porch went dead quiet, and I got that cold, sinking feeling I hadn't had since Army days. You know what I mean? When the world just tilts. My name's Tom Archer, and if you'd asked me last month what kind of trouble I got into, I'd tell you it was nothing bigger than figuring out if I had enough cucumbers to make another batch of pickles. I've been running this little roadside stand, Maple Ridge stand, just a sign painted crooked and a table with whatever I'd pulled out of the ground that week. Pay what you can, take what you need, because it seemed the neighborly thing to do. Mrs. Holloway across the lane was recovering from surgery, and folks around here always did for each other. It felt right, and honestly, I liked seeing the place busy, folks waving as they grab a jar of jam or slipped $1 under a tomato basket. It was simple, until it wasn't. Because right about the time the stand started feeling like home, Vivian Colnew, HOA president, clipboard warrior, decided she was going to make an example out of me. She shows up with those giant sunglasses, clicking down my gravel like she owned the place. Voice clipped and official, calls me Mr. Archer like she's reading my charges. Unpermitted commercial activity, she says deadpan. At first I laugh, thinking, you gotta be kidding me, but her smile just gets thinner. And the next thing I know, she's rattling off violations and the sanctity of the Willow Ridge covenants, which, let's be honest, nobody actually reads until it gives them ammo. That's when it turned from annoying to personal. Letters started coming. Warnings, fines, pictures of my stand with time stamps like I was running a moonshine still. Neighbors who used to stop and chat started ducking their heads at the mailbox. Someone even set up a camera in the old oak out front, pointed right at my driveway like I was public enemy number one for selling zucchini and jam. I'll admit, it stung. I found myself sitting up late, hunched over deed records, county maps, the kind of paperwork my grandfather used to say was only for folks who didn't trust a handshake. But I didn't want to be railroaded just because the loudest voice in the room said so. I wanted the truth to matter. There's a special kind of shame that comes when people you thought were neighbors suddenly treat you like a problem. I got why Vivian wanted the stand gone. Some folks love control more than they love community. But the way she did it, with this cold, brittle edge, made me think it was about more than zoning. Found out later, she and my brother nearly went to court over a tree dispute years back. Guess some folks never let things go. So I started documenting everything jars sold, notes left, old surveys. Even talked to Sheriff Ramos, who grew up around here. He came by, bought a jar of preserves, and told me, Tom, you're not a criminal, but it sure looks like somebody wants you to feel like one. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about my veggie stand. It was about rules getting weaponized. Vivian kicked things up a notch, called a special HOA hearing, invited the local news. I caught her practicing lines in her car, making sure she looked like the champion of neighborhood values or whatever. The hearing was like a bad reality show TV lights, half the neighborhood crammed in folding chairs. But then something happened I didn't see coming. Neighbors I hadn't talked to in months showed up. Mrs. Holloway's daughter spoke about how my stand helped when her mom was sick. Old Coach Daniels, who hadn't said more than 5 words to me since high school, got up and told the story of his grandson tasting a real tomato for the first time and grinning ear to ear. And just like that, it wasn't just my fight anymore. Even got a twist. Patrice, this sharp-as-attack lawyer who moved in last year, offered to help for free. Paper cuts beat punches, she said, and she went to work. We dug up county ordinances. Turns out there's a right to farm clause nobody bothered to check. Submitted the deed my grandfather signed, receipts for everything. Vivian tried to tighten the screws, more fines, threats of lawsuits, but the more she pushed, the more people showed up. Folks started dropping by just to say they were on my side. Somebody baked a cake for the stand's court day, and the harvest night we threw, what was supposed to be just a few folks turned into half the neighborhood music, laughter, people trading recipes. Then came the big night. Vivian, no clipboard for once, asked to address everyone. She went on about order and community standards, but you could hear in her voice that she'd lost the room. Somebody called out, "We want neighbors, not cops," and folks actually cheered. For the first time, I saw Vivian hesitate, like maybe she realized she'd become the villain in a story she thought she was writing. You ever see someone realize they're on the wrong side of a crowd? It's something. After that, the dam kind of broke. Special election, 2 board members ousted, replaced by folks who remembered what it was like before everything had to be voted on or fined. Vivian resigned, took her rule book with her. We came to an agreement. The stand stays, basic guidelines, no more surveillance. Not perfect, but good enough. What did I learn? That sometimes being right isn't enough, you need backup, and sometimes it comes from places you never expected. That rules can be used for good or bad, depending on who's swinging the gavel. And that kindness, small as it seems, can build something stronger than fear. I still get up early, still wipe down that old table, and sometimes the kid who once traded a comic book for pickles comes by to help stack boxes, a little older, a little taller. The quiet feels right again. But there's always another fight Kaminga letter in the drawer about some developer sniffing around, new folks moving in with new ideas of order. That's life. Messy, unfinished, always something brewing. So tell me, have you ever been on the wrong end of a rule that made no sense? Or had to fight for something simple just because it mattered to you? What matters more, rules or people? Drop a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and share your story. Because in the end, maybe justice is just a handshake and a shared jar of jam. And maybe the best stories are the ones that make us argue together. If you got something out of this, hit like, subscribe, and pass it on to someone who needs a reminder that showing up counts. Let me pick up right where I left off, because honestly, things didn't just tie up neatly after Vivian walked away, no matter how much folks wanted to believe that. There's something about a win like that. It gives you hope, sure, but also paints a target on your back if you're not careful. And around here, news travels faster than summer storms. About 2 weeks after the agreement, life started to settle back into a rhythm. The Maple Ridge stand was busier than ever, and for a minute, I let myself believe maybe we'd all learn something. Folks brought their kids, neighbors waved again, and even people who'd sided with Vivian started coming by, a little sheepish, slipping a few extra bills in the donation jar like that would erase months of dirty looks. I didn't hold it against them. Life's complicated, you know? Most people just want to get through their day without getting dragged into drama. But that peace was short-lived. One Thursday morning, just as the fog was burning off and I was setting out a crate of peppers, a silver Lexus I'd never seen before eased up the lane. Out steps a man in a crisp suit, city shoes not meant for gravel, carrying a leather briefcase. The way he looked around, you'd think he'd discovered a rare animal. He introduced himself as Daniel Prescott, land use consultant, which, let's be honest, is usually code for developer's errand boy. He asked a lot of polite questions, not about the stand, but about the land itself, zoning, boundaries, if I'd ever considered selling, and whether I was aware of the potential for upscale community expansion. I just smiled, told him the only expansion I was interested in was the garden, but his eyes kept drifting past me, like he was already picturing bulldozers. The next week, rumors started to swirl a subdivision proposal, maybe a golf course, something big enough to get the county's attention. Turns out, Vivian's resignation wasn't just about the stand. She'd already been talking to folks about revitalizing Willow Ridge. Suddenly, all those rules folks had weaponized against me became loopholes for people with deeper pockets. You know that feeling when the fight shifts and you realize the old enemy was just the opening act? I could see the neighborhood start a split. Some folks got nervous property values, change, all that. Others came by in the evening, worried the stand would be swept away in another round of so-called progress. Patrice, my lawyer friend, showed up with a stack of paperwork and a look that meant business. If they want to fight, she said, we'll give them one they won't forget. It wasn't just about jam anymore. It was about the soul of the place, the quiet that lets you hear birds in the morning, and the kind of trust you only build over decades. One evening, as I was closing up, Mrs. Holloway came tapping the dirt, and handed me a faded photograph. That's my father, digging this garden a year before the war, she said. Places like this don't survive because people give in. I stuck that photo up behind the counter where it could remind me why any of this mattered. But here's where things took another sharp turn. Remember that kid who used to trade comic books for pickles? His mom, Laura, turns out she works at the county assessor's office. One night, she showed up with a stack of documents and a grin that said she knew something nobody else did. Turns out, decades back, my grandfather had put a clause in the deed if the land was ever used for anything other than family farming or neighborly trade, it reverted to the township. Meaning, Prescott and his money men couldn't just swoop in and build over our memories. You should have seen Patrice when she read that line. She laughed for the first time in weeks. Next day, she filed the notice with the county, and by the end of the week, word got out. Suddenly, the developers lost interest. They like easy marks, not legacy land with strings attached. After that, something shifted in the air. People who'd been bickering over fences and trash started showing up to help plant beans. We set up a real community garden right there by the stand. Sheriff Ramos came by with his wife, handed out lemonade, told stories about growing up before half these houses were built. For a while, it almost felt like a small town again before all the rules, before the letters and meetings. But don't get me wrong, I'm not naive. I know the fights never really end. There'll always be somebody, somewhere, who wants to redraw the lines for their own gain. There'll always be a Prescott or a Vivian, trying to turn neighbor against neighbor with promises of improvement. But now, folks around here know what it's like to stand up together, to fight not just for land, but for each other. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever had to defend something small, but precious, a family recipe, a patch of woods, a simple way of life, know you're not alone. Tell me about it down in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. What would you fight for, even if it looked hopeless? And what's worth more to you, a contract or a handshake and a neighbor's word? Share this story if it reminded you of home or made you wish you had one. Hit like, subscribe, and stick around because these fights are never really over, and I figure the best stories are the ones that keep us talking long after the lights go out.